All right, so through the circulation study, a stat that we felt it's important to call attention to is that on average, 30% of people in the community do not have access to a car. Others make the choice to walk, bike, or bus for other reasons, and everyone needs a way to safely and comfortably get to their destinations. And this local stat is just one example of the work that we need to do to increase access. This shows average number of jobs accessible within 20 minutes. And as you can see, if you can drive, if you have the ability to drive and you have access to a car, you can get to nearly every job in the city. But if you're dependent on taking the bus or finding a safe biking or walking route, it gets a lot more challenging. So we know that we have more work to do. And what you see on the screen are just numbers, but there are real human experiences behind these numbers. And we want to try to better understand those experiences and be able to talk about them as part of the work that we do. So that's why we were very interested when we had the opportunity to test a tool that captures those real experiences and then gives us the data to understand what it's like to rely on riding a bike in the city of Ann Arbor. Velo is a tech startup. Their first device you can see on the screen there, it's called a Copilot. Essentially looks like a bike light that attaches on the back of a bike, and it captures both the speed and the proximity of passing vehicles. And I'll show this short clip just so you can see how it works. So it happens pretty quickly, but you can see that it's tracking the distance of that passing vehicle and the speed of the vehicle. And this one is pretty heavily anonymized. That's what the term that Velo uses. So you can't even identify the background here. In the other videos we show, you'll be able to identify the location, but other identifying features like people's faces or license plates have been blurred. Okay, so for the study, we partnered with Common Cycle. They helped us organize a group of resident volunteers, and those volunteers rode all over the city. So in your packet, you have data, the full report has data from all over the city. We were interested in 5 focus routes that overlapped with our circulation study. So that's West Washington, Miller, North Division, East Catherine, and Packard Street. The brighter the line, the more rides or more data we had for those corridors. We had a range of participants. Some ride their bikes independently, others ride with their families, including their children. You can see from the top quote there, one family was preparing their daughter to ride independently to school, and they called attention to safety concerns they had, particularly at North Division, Cary, and Broadway. Others, you can see from the other quotes, the confidence of the riders varied, but many of our volunteers rely on a bike as their primary means of transportation. To give you a better sense of what Velo was analyzing or looking for, they are tracking the relationship between the passing distance and the speed of that pass. So the lower the speed and the wider distance, the more safe. The higher speed and the smaller the distance, the less safe. So this chart actually shows each individual pass. The good news is that most of the passes provided 6 feet of passing distance on average. That aligns with our local law that requires 5 feet of passing distance. We did, however, see passes less than 5 feet and in that less safe part of the chart. So if you look at the Velo report, you'll see a pretty complicated equation that they applied to all of the data. I'm going to try to go over it at a high level and use these videos to convey user experience and comfort. Alongside each video, you'll see some information. Part of that is this stress score, and according to Velo, anything higher than a 0.5 is stressful and uncomfortable for the person riding the bike. So this is a video on South Division within the separated bikeway. You can see the car speed is below the speed limit. There is a lot of passing distance, and this is considered a low stress pass. Here's another example on the South Division bikeway. The vehicle in this case is well below the speed limit. There's still a large passing distance, and again, a low stress pass here. And hopefully this isn't making anybody too dizzy. All right, so let's look at how that experience compares to an area that doesn't have separation. So this is North Division, just beyond the separated bikeway. behind, or actually in front of Community High School. And this is close to that Division Broadway area that one of our participants expressed safety concerns about. And you can see everyone's traveling downhill here. The first car gives the person on the bike space as they pass, but the second car does not, and they don't appear to slow down. So this is considered a stressful pass. Here's another example on Packard Street. You can see that the person riding the bike is traveling at a comfortable pace in the bike lane. There's a large truck traveling well above the speed limit, showing no signs of slowing down. So you can see their vehicle speed is 43 miles an hour. And keep in mind that studies show that at speeds of around 40 miles an hour, there's a 75% risk of severe injury and a 50% risk of death in a crash. So speed matters. And while they provided just over 5 feet of distance, the speed of the truck made this a very stressful pass. Here's another downhill example, the person riding in the narrow bike lane on Miller, that thankfully next year we will see this condition change. Again, the driver is traveling above the speed limit when they pass the person biking, and that is another stressful pass. And then just like thinking about, that device is on the back of a bike, that's often where a child seat is, or a child seat might be trailing behind a bike, and just thinking about the experience of these riders. So here's West Washington Street. This is a quiet residential street. The vehicle's moving at a slow speed and they provide plenty of passing distance. This is a low stress pass. So hopefully just in these few video samples, you've gotten a sense for how street design starts to influence driver behavior and the experience of people that use these streets. And that's exactly what Velo concluded, that there's significant difference in average driver behavior based on infrastructure type. Where we have separated bike lanes, vehicles are traveling at lower speeds and providing more distance. Where there's no separation, like in a standard bike lane or no bike lane, they found higher speeds and closer passes. Okay, we'll take just a few slides to look at the data in more detail related to the focused route. So remember, these are the areas without separated bike lanes. Velo looked at risk per pass, risk per mile, and risk per minute. And across all of these, Miller, Division, and Packard kept rising to the top. And unfortunately, we did not have enough data to make conclusions about Catherine Street. Digging into this in more detail, we can look at where we saw close passes. So these are passes closer than 5 feet. On the focus routes, nearly 40% of all passes on Packard were too close, and about 30% of all passes on Miller. When we look at it by bike infrastructure type, the curb protected bike lanes performed very well. When we look at it by vehicle type, pickup truck drivers had the highest frequency of close passes, but pretty high frequency among small and large vehicle drivers as well. And this is an area where the professional drivers really seem to be doing the best job of providing enough space.
Back one.
Sure.
It's interesting on the none is less chance of a close pass than a standard bike lane. No bike lane.
I think it's because the driver will veer off so much
To give room.
That's my theory. Am I right on that?
None are more residential streets that are like less.
Yeah, I mean, it may be like the psychology of it because there's not a dedicated lane there. Drivers are, more often giving a little bit more space.
That's my experience as a cyclist and as a driver. Like, I know I will give a lot of space if I'm driving and slow down, right? Like,
and it could also be that people that are riding a bike on a street without a bike lane are more likely to be taking the lane, so riding more in the center of the lane, which then prevents a pass.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And no bus close pass interactions.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Will we share about that? That's a big vehicle.
Not always true.
Okay, so looking at the stressful pass, remember this is the risk score of 0.5 or higher. So it's a combination of too close and too fast. And what Velo found was that every single pass captured on division beyond the separated bikeway was stressful. Every single pass. On Miller and Packard, more than 50% of the passes were stressful. So when we think about what this means for the people who are relying on bikes and taking those routes today, they're having stressful experiences all the time just to get to their destination. And when we're thinking about our larger carbon neutrality goals of encouraging more people to take a bike, these are real barriers that we have to overcome if we want more people riding bikes downtown. Velo also summarized the passing speed, and this is at the time of the pass, so this is when you would expect the vehicle to be at the driver to be at their most cautious and the vehicle to be going at its slowest. The good news is that the average passing speed was within the speed limit on all of the corridors. The bad news is that on every street except for Washington, we recorded passes above the speed limit. And back to that stat that I shared earlier about the risk of injury and death directly correlating with speed, that's the kind of behavior that we want to change through infrastructure. And lastly, Velo took all of the data that they collected and created a bike stress map of the city. Blue represents low stress and red high stress. It's a little challenging to read, so I'll point out some corridors. In that map on your left, Miller, Packard, and West Liberty are some of the most red corridors. And then when we zoom in on the DDA district area, that Division Broadway corridor becomes really clear, and a small segment on Washington by the YMCA where there's a lot of that drop-off activity. So with all of this, Velo concluded that there is a significant variation in risk among the proposed routes. Miller had the greatest risk per mile and per minute, and they suggested highest priority for that corridor, which is great because that's already in the plans. And Division had the riskiest overtakes, but less frequency of passing, and Packard also had some stressful sections. And they continued to call attention to the fact that the type of bike infrastructure matters, and said that curb protected bike lanes are significantly safer compared to standard lanes. And Maura already went over our circulation study recommendations, but those essentially align with what we heard from Velo. We're recommending extending the separated bikeway network on a lot of those corridors that rose to the top in terms of having high risk, and then recommending a bike boulevard on Washington to reinforce those slow speeds that we're already seeing. And from our volunteers, we generally heard positive feedback about participating in the pilot and the possibility that we can expand the separated bikeway network. That's everything I have.
Thank you, Amber.
It's very informative.
Very interesting
It's
data.
really good.
How long is the study ongoing, or is this wrapped up?
This
or
is wrapped up, so you're seeing
It's a
the end of
pilot?
it.
Okay.
And we always have the opportunity in the future, as we install more infrastructure, to bring this tool back and see if the changes we've made have resulted in a change in behavior. So that could be something interesting that we can do both with Velo, and there are also U of M researchers that are starting to look at this kind of technology as well.